My name is Peter Heminger. I'm right now a master's student in communications here at the university and also did my undergrad here in business. But I did take a few years off in between. I was the music and film editor at Fast Forward Weekly, which is the arts and culture publication here in town. And I've also worked for a couple of film festivals in town and volunteered for a bunch of other festivals and all that sort of stuff.
Great. What are you working on right now?
In school, I'm working on my master's thesis, which involved interviewing a bunch of musicians. It's on copyright and creativity and songwriting and that sort of thing. So I traveled to Winnipeg and Vancouver and talked to musicians about their songwriting process. As far as work goes, I'm working for the Calgary International Film Festival. I choose all of the short films that they play at the festival. So I'm in the process of watching a lot of short films and then deciding which ones are worth showing to other people.
And when you started off in your first year, is this where you envisioned that you would be at this point?
Not at all, actually. I started off, like I said, I was doing the business program, and I was in business because I had this idea that I wanted to work for a major record label, which is maybe showing my age a little bit because that was at a time where that seemed like it was maybe an idea. And then, the business program here was great in terms of teaching me a lot of things that have come in handy in a lot of different jobs, but it also taught me that I didn't want just a business job and that any career path that I took, whether I was at a record label or working at some random store selling widgets, would be kind of the same thing. So that was a handy thing that came out of it, was that I learned what I didn't want to do, for one thing. The most influential one for me would have been The Gauntlet, the university newspaper, which I only really started going to because a friend of mine told me there was a stack of free CDs outside that you didn't even have to do reviews, it was just stuff that no one wanted. Eventually, when I was there for long enough, I felt like I had to start contributing something. So I started writing entertainment stories, and by the time I was done, I think I have somewhere around 250 stories that I wrote for The Gauntlet overall over a few years. And through that, I also ended up volunteering a little bit at CJSW here and there, which is the radio station on campus, which I still do keep active with as well. I do volunteer show fills on there, so whenever a friend of mine who has a radio show is out of town for a week, I'll go on and play a bunch of music and ramble awkwardly. But as far as real stories that weren't just ridiculous stories about squids taking over the world, I think my favorite stories were honestly the interviews with local artists and local musicians. Because you actually get to meet them face to face instead of talking over the phone. But for sure, one of my favorite interviews that I've ever done was one of the first interviews I did at the Gauntlet, which was with a musician named Martin Tielli, who was in a band called the Rheostatics and now just has this weird eclectic solo career. And I phoned him up. He was in the middle of recording an album out in a barn in the middle of nowhere with some friends, and he answered the phone by asking me if I knew how to cook a chicken. And I didn't know how to do that properly, but the conversation just went on for like an hour and a half, talking about everything from this town that my mom grew up in has a sandstone quarry, and he's really into fossils, so he was super excited about that. It was just the friendliest conversation that just went absolutely everywhere, and it made me realize that this is something that I would like to do a lot more often.
Can you tell us a little bit about how this involvement has kind of shaped your university career, I suppose? University experience.
Yeah, I guess the biggest thing is that I never quite felt like I fit in the business faculty. There were a lot of great people there, but not many people that I ever spent time with outside of class. And so when I went to the Gauntlet, all of a sudden it just sort of clicked. There were all of these people that had exactly the same interests as me, that had sort of had similar high school experiences, and that just everything just sort of worked. And most of the best friendships that I have in my life either come out of my time at the Gauntlet or indirectly through meeting someone who met someone from there. Mm-hmm. So it made my university experience a lot easier in that sense, in that I suddenly had this group of amazing people who were doing amazing things and who are still doing amazing things after they've graduated. It just kind of opened my eyes to all of the things that you could do other than just, going to campus, going to your classes, and then going home.
kind of advice would you give to a first-year student?
I would say just be willing to follow tangents, because like I said, this whole thing, I wouldn't have worked at Fast Forward, and I wouldn't have worked for the film festival, and I wouldn't have done any of this stuff if it wasn't for my time at the Gauntlet. And the whole reason I went to the Gauntlet was because I wanted some free CDs. So even if it's just some one-off event or something that seems like a totally silly and selfish reason to do something, if something seems interesting to you, follow it through and see where it goes, because the plans you make don't work out a lot of the time, and the stuff that happens in between is where all of the interesting things come from.